Allison had always been the heart of her home, a kind, patient woman known for her warm smile and steady reassurance. That morning, as the clock ticked steadily, she kissed her children softly goodbye. "I'm just going to the store, and I'll be back in an hour," she promised, her voice imbued with the certainty that comes from years of caring for her family. The children, still bleary-eyed but trusting, waved goodbye. There was no hint of foreboding in the air, no sense that this simple errand would be the last time their mother's presence graced the familiar halls of their home. It was an ordinary morning in the quiet suburb where the Webster family lived. A morning that seemed to promise nothing more than the familiar comforts of routine and togetherness. The sun had only just risen, its gentle rays filtering through the lace curtains and casting warm patterns on the hardwood floors of the Webster household. In the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet scent of toasted bread. Allison Webster, the devoted mother of 3, moved about with her customary grace. Every detail of that morning was perfect. She prepared breakfast with loving care, arranged the children's lunches neatly into their backpacks, and even checked the weather forecast to ensure everyone was dressed appropriately for the day ahead. After stepping outside, Allison paused for a brief moment in the cool morning air. She unlocked the front door and walked down the tree-lined street toward the local supermarket, a trip she had made countless times before. Neighbors smiled politely as she passed, each one comfortable in the shared rhythm of daily life. In that small town, routines were sacrosanct, and nothing ever disrupted the predictable cadence of existence. Yet, as the minutes turned into hours, an uneasy silence began to seep into the Webster residence. The children waited at the breakfast table, their wide eyes following the empty doorway. The sound of the front door closing behind her echoed, and with it came a subtle yet profound absence. Initially, the family attributed the delay to a possible traffic snarl or an unexpected stop at the store. However, when a second hour passed without any sign of Allison, a chill of uncertainty rippled through the household. Soon, the peaceful stillness of that morning gave way to an anxious flurry of activity. The telephone rang, first once, then again, each time answered with hopeful expectation that Allison might be calling to explain her delay. When no voice came through, questions began to pile up like unyielding bricks. The children's innocent queries, "Mommy, where are you?" were met with tentative explanations by their father, who tried his best to calm their rising fears. Within the hour following her departure, the family's hope slowly gave way to distress. Calls were made to friends, neighbors, and eventually to the local police. Officers arrived at the Webster home, their expressions initially sympathetic but growing increasingly perplexed as they learned that Allison had not returned. In the early days of the disappearance, theories abounded. The police quickly labeled her a probable runaway, suggesting that perhaps she had left of her own volition. Whispers soon spread throughout the neighborhood, rumors of a secret life, hushed speculations that Allison Webster, a woman once known for her quiet dignity, might have chosen to disappear rather than face some hidden menace. The cozy home that once echoed with laughter and the soft murmur of everyday conversation was transformed into a space filled with unanswered questions. The children, once so full of hope and certainty in their mother's return, now found themselves adrift in a sea of confusion and sorrow. Family photographs on the walls gathered dust under the weight of uncertainty. Every day, the Websters combed through phone records, visited the police station, and sought out any scrap of information that might explain the inexplicable absence of a woman who had only recently promised to return home. Then, as if making a final, inscrutable statement on that fateful day, an even more perplexing detail soon came to light. Just 1 week after Allison's disappearance, police investigative leads unearthed evidence that hinted at a possible false trail. Surveillance footage from an ATM, located nearly 200 miles away from her home, captured images of money being withdrawn, a detail that, at first, was interpreted by some officers as proof that Allison had indeed fled. The news ignited fierce debates. How could a loving mother simply vanish and travel such vast distances without any explanation? Some in law enforcement clung to the notion that she had deliberately run off, while others in the community whispered about the possibility of a hidden life that no one had ever suspected. For the Websters, this revelation was a double-edged sword. It fueled their anger and deepened their sorrow, for the idea that their beloved Allison could have abandoned them tormented their hearts. Yet, even as confusion reigned, the family's desperation to uncover the truth never wavered. Every moment of that early morning, the perfect start of a day that had promised hope and routine, now seemed haunted by a silent scream of loss. In those initial hours, just as the familiar morning faded into a day steeped in loneliness and fear, the seeds of a long, arduous search were sown. Little did the family know that the mystery surrounding Allison Webster's disappearance was not the simple tale of a runaway, but the beginning of a narrative woven with sacrifice, desperate choices, and a conspiracy stretching far beyond what anyone could have ever imagined. In the aftermath of that seemingly unremarkable morning, Oak Ridge's quiet streets would soon be transformed into the backdrop of a mystery that would keep the Websters, and the entire community, awake for many years to come. Within hours of Allison Webster's disappearance, the once peaceful Webster household was overrun by uncertainty and mounting despair. In the wake of that fateful morning, the morning when a loving mother's promise to return was broken, the local police force quickly filed what they termed a missing person report. By that time, whispers had already begun circulating among neighbors. Some wondered if Allison had chosen to leave of her own volition, while others insisted that something darker must have occurred. The police, relying on standard procedure and the information provided by the distraught husband and confused children, initially categorized her case as a likely runaway situation. The early theory was simple. Perhaps under pressure or personal duress, Allison had broken free from an oppressive routine. Yet, as the hours turned into days, that explanation soon proved unsatisfactory to the surviving family. Within the precinct headquarters, investigators pored over the scant evidence available. Photographs from the morning, capturing Allison's calm smile as she left the house, were juxtaposed with the stunned faces captured on security cameras at the front door after her departure. Phone records indicated no call or message for an extended period. Every minute that passed deepened the mystery. In hushed conference rooms, detectives exchanged worried glances as they documented every detail. Their early interviews with the family revealed that Allison had displayed nothing but care and consistency, and yet the very next moment, she had vanished without explanation. A week after that sorrowful morning, an unexpected twist further complicated the narrative. While reviewing mundane transactional records from nearby ATMs, a routine check in many missing person cases, the investigative team discovered something odd. A withdrawal of a significant sum of money from an ATM located nearly 200 miles away from Oak Ridge Heights. The unauthorized withdrawal was inconsistent with any known pattern of behavior for Allison. Initially, a few officers took this to confirm the runaway theory. The logic was simple. If she had indeed left of her own volition, it might explain why funds appeared to be withdrawn from a distant location, suggesting she had made arrangements to start a new life far away. Posters were printed and distributed, and headlines in the local paper began to speculate on the possibility of Allison Webster building a secret life under a new identity. Some community members whispered that she might have had a hidden life, leaving behind the responsibilities of family for adventures unknown. For the Webster family, however, this revelation was anything but reassuring. At their modest home, the air was thick with disbelief and bitter disappointment. Their father, who had always been the rock of the family, attempted to put on a brave face as he answered tearful questions from his children. But inside, he was tormented by the implications. How could the woman who had once carefully packed lunches and read bedtime stories vanish as effortlessly as if she were a ghost? The children, growing older with each unanswered question, began to wonder if their mother had truly abandoned them, or if some unspoken danger had forced her hand. Soon, the local media caught wind of the escalating controversy. Local newspapers ran front-page exposés with headlines such as, "Mother Gone Runaway or Victim of a Hidden Life," and "Webster Family's Tragic Disappearance. What Really Happened?" Television news crews descended on Oak Ridge Heights, interviewing tearful neighbors, sympathetic teachers, and outraged friends of the family. On air, reporters questioned the police's initial conclusion, suggesting that a mother of three, beloved in the community and known for her gentle character, could hardly be expected to simply run away without leaving a trace unless something far more sinister was at play. At one community forum held at the local town hall, emotions ran high. Neighbors debated passionately, with some defending the police's interpretation of a runaway scenario, while others were incensed, arguing that Allison had been a pillar of stability and kindness. A local activist, her voice trembling with anger, demanded, "How can you dismiss a woman who dedicated her life to her children as merely running off? Someone must have forced her to choose between her safety and her family." Her words resonated deeply with many in the audience, and soon, a quiet campaign for a more thorough investigation began to take shape. As the days turned to weeks, the initial hope that Allison might simply reappear dwindled. The police continued to insist on the runaway theory, bolstered by the mysterious ATM transaction. They publicly maintained that financial records suggested she had left on her own accord, an explanation meant to provide closure. Yet, every interview with family members, every tear tracked by concerned neighbors, and every unanswered question in the silent dead of the Webster home only fueled growing distrust. The family, desperate for the truth, repeatedly requested that the case be re-examined and that a new, impartial investigation be launched. They distributed flyers, made public appeals on local radio, and even approached a local investigative journalist who had built a reputation for uncovering long-buried secrets. Amid this cacophony of emotions, an undercurrent of curiosity mixed with outrage soon began to define the community's perception of the case. Some local residents, well aware of the town's history of minor bureaucratic oversights, cautioned that perhaps the police had simply jumped to conclusions too quickly, ready to fit the woman's disappearance into an already convenient narrative. Meanwhile, others speculated that the ATM withdrawal might have been a red herring, a deliberate piece of planted evidence intended to mislead the investigation and stoke suspicions of a runaway scenario. As tension mounted, the once tightly knit community of Oak Ridge Heights was now splintered by suspicion and grief. The ensuing days were marked by quiet marches, candlelight vigils outside the police station, and a growing chorus of demands for transparency and accountability. Each plea for a reinvestigation was met with bureaucratic delays and assurances that the matter was being looked into, but the silence that followed was deafening. This painful period would set into motion the long, arduous journey that the Webster family would endure for over a decade. A journey marked by persistent hope, relentless follow-ups with authorities, and the constant struggle to keep alive the memory of a mother who would one day, they hoped, return to provide answers. Little did they know that a twist in fate, sparked by a modern breakthrough in forensic technology and an accidental discovery in a long-forgotten abandoned house, would, 14 years later, begin to unravel the decades-old mystery and shed light on why Allison Webster had truly vanished on that fateful morning. In the months that followed the frantic search and impassioned community outcry, the investigation into Allison Webster's disappearance soon stalled. Despite the best efforts of the family and a few determined local activists, the police, constrained by limited resources and mounting pressure to resolve the case, eventually leaned on the initial theory. With scant evidence arguing otherwise, the authorities officially designated Allison as a runaway. A file was closed, statements were archived, and the case was relegated to an unremarkable chapter in the precinct's records. The decision was met with cold confusion by many in the community. If a loving mother could so easily vanish without a trace, questions began to multiply rather than find solace in a tidy explanation. At first, the Webster household clung to hope. The children, then so young that their memories were intermingled with whimsical dreams of a fairy tale reunion, began to ask innocent yet piercing questions. "Mommy, when are you coming home?" Their father would answer with forced optimism. "She promised to be back shortly." But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, that promise faded into silence. The once vibrant home, which had been saturated with the warmth of maternal care, grew heavy with the silence of abandonment. Allison's belongings, once carefully arranged in her room, became a shrine of bittersweet memories. A half-packed bag in the closet, a faded scarf on the dresser, and a calendar with the days slowly crossed off one after another. The local media, initially captivated by the mystery of a missing mother, gradually shifted its attention elsewhere. Sensational headlines turned into archived clippings in dusty binders. Neighbors who had once gathered in hushed tones by mailbox fences no longer whispered about a woman leading a secret life. Instead, the prevailing narrative was that Allison Webster had, perhaps under some private duress, chosen freedom from a life that had become unbearable. Yet, this explanation never sat right with the Websters. Every unanswered question gnawed at their hearts. Why would a devoted mother abandon her children without a trace? What unseen force or secret could have driven her away so completely? As time marched relentlessly on, the case file closed by the police began to symbolize more than just a bureaucratic conclusion. It epitomized the void left in the Webster family's life. The children, once filled with tender hopes of a reunion, soon learned to navigate life with emotions as tangled as the unanswered questions that lurked in every corner of their minds. The eldest, once a bright-eyed child asking about her mother's gentle smile, gradually adopted a hardened maturity. She discovered that solace was hard to come by when each birthday, every holiday, and even mundane daily routines were punctuated by the unmistakable absence of a voice that should have been there. Her notebooks, which were once filled with drawings of family picnics and loving portraits, now bore scribbled annotations of sorrow and desperate questions that no one would answer. The middle child, caught between childhood innocence and the dawning reality of loss, drifted through school with a quiet defiance. While teachers praised his academic achievements, his eyes betrayed a haunted past. A struggle to understand why someone so essential could simply vanish into the ether. He became adept at feigning normalcy, yet at night, as the world around him slept peacefully, he would lie awake questioning every day, "Why did she leave?" The whispered conversations among classmates soon shifted from admiration for a typical suburban family to quiet pity, and even malice, as rumors circled in the playground about a mother who had gotten tired of her children. Even the youngest, his tender years inevitably marred by the uncertainty of abandonment, internalized the new normal with a confused silence. His nighttime lullabies, once filled with soft reassurances from his father, now echoed with an uncertainty that left him grappling with an uncharacteristic timidity. In family gatherings, while relatives tried to fill the void with sympathetic stories of Allison, the children could sense that there was more to the story than even the adults dared speak. The unanswered questions and the perpetual absence of closure grew into an unyielding weight, one that each of them carried silently into adulthood. In the broader community of Oak Ridge Heights, the official narrative that Allison had simply run away was met with mixed reactions. Some residents, indoctrinated by years of small-town conformity, accepted the explanation with weary resignation, believing that life was sometimes governed by inexplicable choices. Others, particularly those who had known Allison as a kind and gentle soul, balked at the notion. They remembered her as a woman whose laughter once rang clear in community picnics, and whose compassionate touch had healed wounds, both physical and emotional. Their persistent disbelief, however, was drowned out by the heavy hand of an investigation closed too soon and simplified too neatly. The police, under mounting pressure from the shifting priorities of law enforcement and the local government, slowly redirected resources to new cases. The investigation into Allison Webster's disappearance became a relic of a past unsolved mystery, a topic for quiet murmurs in the community and a periodic mention in outdated files at the station. Over the ensuing years, attempts by the Webster family to reopen the case were met with bureaucratic delays, polite dismissals, or cold, uninformative responses tinged with skepticism. The Websters found themselves frequently repeating their story at community meetings, in letters, and in interviews with local journalists, only to be told that the past was best left as it was recorded. A case of a runaway that found its closure in official documents, but not in the hearts of those left behind. In school reunions and family celebrations, the children, now no longer children but young adults, felt the invisible chasm that Allison's absence had carved into their lives. Their mutual glances, filled with knowing sorrow, conveyed the trials of growing up without essential parts of one's identity. As birthdays went by and anniversaries of her disappearance silently passed, each year compounded the accumulated grief and uncertainty. The unanswered questions formed a tapestry of loss and betrayal that no amount of time seemed capable of healing. Over the span of 14 long years, As society moved on and technological advancements redefined how memories were captured and preserved, the unresolved mystery of Allison Webster lingered like a shadow over the family's collective memory. The photographs in the old family album, the familiar corner of the living room once occupied by her vibrant presence, and even the gently worn-out belongings in a dusty drawer served as constant reminders of the chasm left by a mother who had vanished on an unremarkable morning. The Webster children, each in their own way, learned to compartmentalize the pain and somehow forge lives around a gaping wound, a wound that whispered of secrets and silences that refused to be mended by time alone. And so, the case was closed, the official narrative locked away in files and memories, but the truth remained locked within the hearts of those who had lost a part of themselves forever. Until that pivotal moment decades later, when a stray letter and a fingerprint found in an abandoned house would spark a re-examination of the past. The family was left to live with the silent torment of unanswered questions. In the long, lonely years that followed, the Websters learned that sometimes the closure offered by the system is but a shallow salve on wounds too deep for easy healing. Their faith in justice and truth was slowly eroded by the systemic indifference, leaving behind the most painful lesson of all, that when the voices of the lost go unheard, the silence becomes the loudest testament to a tragedy unresolved. 14 years had slipped past since that fateful morning when Allison Webster vanished without a trace. The Webster family had long come to accept the official conclusion. A case closed as a runaway, and the painful void of unanswered questions had settled like dust in the corners of their lives. Life moved forward in fits and starts, but deep within every family member lingered the silent hope that one day the truth would be revealed. That hope, smothered by years of disappointment and resigned sorrow, was about to be ignited in the unlikeliest of places. On an overcast autumn afternoon, almost as if the weather itself mourned the lost years, a local historian named Marcus Jensen was wandering the outskirts of Oak Ridge Heights. Drawn by curiosity and armed with a camera to document forgotten relics of the town's past, he stumbled upon a dilapidated house tucked away behind overgrown vegetation and rusted fences. The building, once a modest family home, now stood as a crumbling testament to the passage of time. Its windows were grimy mirrors reflecting stories long obscured by decay, and its door creaked open as if inviting a return to secrets best left unsaid. Marcus, intrigued by the prospect of preserving history, stepped inside. The heavy scent of damp wood and stale air filled his lungs with every cautious step he took down the creaking hallway. In a small, dust-laden parlor, scattered personal effects lay undisturbed. A pair of reading glasses, a faded photo in a cracked frame, and, most curiously, a sealed envelope resting atop a cluttered desk. The envelope, yellowed and fragile, had a handwritten address in an elegant script. Something about it, combined with an inexplicable glint beneath a layer of grime, caught Marcus's eye. His pulse quickened as he carefully removed the envelope from its resting place. The seal was partially broken, and on the inside flap, a small smudge of dried ink revealed what appeared to be a set of fingerprints. Marcus immediately took out his portable scanner, a modern contraption capable of producing detailed digital impressions of latent prints, and ran it over the residue. The scanner's display revealed a surprisingly clear fingerprint pattern, recorded with precision. Although the black and white image on the screen was simple, it carried the weight of overwhelming possibility. This fingerprint might be tied to someone significant. Unable to ignore his intuition, Marcus digitized the entire envelope, its contents, and the fingerprint data before leaving the abandoned house. Later that week, he forwarded his findings anonymously to a local detective who had long reopened Allison Webster's cold case file. Within days, the detective enlisted the expertise of advanced forensic analysts, and the fingerprint was compared against a national database. In an astonishing twist, the analysis revealed a partial, non-conclusive match with an individual whose profile was obscure, a man who had no clear connection to the case. However, the real breakthrough came when the envelope's paper was subjected to DNA analysis. Traces of biological material clung to the edges of the letter fragment, long since dried and preserved by time. In the cold light of a high-tech forensic lab, technicians extracted and amplified DNA samples from the envelope. With each successive test, the results became harder to ignore. A significant fragment of the genetic code pointed to a woman with a remarkable resemblance to Allison Webster. The analysis wasn't 100% conclusive, a common limitation when dealing with degraded material, but the likelihood was undeniable. The envelope's fingerprint and DNA residue were strong evidence that it had once been in Allison's possession. Yet, the envelope, addressed to a name that no one in the Webster family recognized, hinted at a hidden chapter in her life. Word of the discovery soon spread through the local media and law enforcement circles. The Webster family, long resigned to a lifetime of unanswered what-ifs, were summoned to a quiet meeting at the police station. The tone was cautious, measured, and imbued with the gravity of decades-old secrets suddenly thrust into the present. With trembling hands, the family clutched old photographs and mementos, reminders of a happier, simpler past. While forensic experts outlined the significance of the findings, the evidence suggested that Allison had not simply run away. Instead, she may have taken deliberate steps to erase her former identity and protect her family from an unseen danger. Within the hushed conference room, the detective explained, "These results compel us to reassess everything we thought we knew. This envelope, with its fingerprint and DNA, hints that Allison lived a dual life. A life where she had to conceal her true identity for reasons that may have been far more perilous than anyone could have imagined." A heavy silence descended upon the room as the family absorbed the implications. The revelation was bittersweet. After years of longing and misdirected grief, the promise of closure was now intertwined with new, urgent questions. For the first time in over a decade, the case was reopened with serious momentum. The abandoned house, once forgotten at the edge of town, had become the unexpected catalyst that would unravel a mystery stretching back beyond the moment Allison left home. The DNA evidence and the mysterious envelope were not merely fragments of a past life. They were coded messages from a woman who had been forced to sacrifice everything to protect those she loved. In that moment, it became clear to the Webster family that the truth was far more complicated than the simple narrative of a runaway. Allison Webster had been compelled to assume another identity, and the dangerous forces she fled from were likely still lurking in the shadows. The discovery marked the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter in which the family would soon learn that the most painful truths are often the ones hidden in silence, waiting for the day they are finally allowed to be heard. With the renewed forensic evidence in hand and the case of Allison Webster's disappearance reopened after 14 long years, the renewed investigation took an unexpected turn. Detectives, determined to piece together the secret life that had been hidden from everyone, began re-examining old witness statements and re-interviewing anyone who might have once known Allison or had any inkling of a double life. One name, in particular, kept surfacing in the faded recollections of long-forgotten conversations. An enigmatic and dangerous man whose presence, though never fully understood at the time, now loomed large as a potential key to the mystery. Detective Laura Simmons, leading the re-investigation, arranged to interview Helen Carter, a spry, silver-haired neighbor who had lived in the quiet suburban neighborhood since before Allison's disappearance. Helen had been a close friend of Allison's and was one of the few who had continued to cast a wary, but unwavering eye over the years, whispering of strange visitors and shady characters that occasionally loitered near Allison's modest home. Over a cup of weak tea in Helen's cluttered, memorabilia-filled living room, the detective gently broached the subject of Allison's final days from Helen's point of view. Helen's eyes clouded with memories as she recounted the ordinary days she had once shared with Allison. "I remember that morning as if it were yesterday," Helen began, her voice quivering ever so slightly. "Allison left our block with her usual smile, promising she would return in an hour. But I recall something else. A man, not a neighbor we would normally chat with, but someone whose presence was always accompanied by a palpable unease. I saw him frequently, lurking near the curbs, as if waiting for something or someone. I always thought he was just another odd character passing through, but in retrospect, his visits were not innocent at all." Detective Simmons leaned in, urging Helen to continue. "What did he look like? Did you get his name?" Helen hesitated, then said, "I believe I heard him referred to as Mr. Lawson by Allison, though I never saw his face clearly. He was always in a dark coat, and his eyes cold, calculating, seemed to scan the neighborhood, as if he was always on the lookout. Allison would sometimes mention that he was a friend, though I always sensed a dangerous edge in that friendship. I also recall that one chilly evening, shortly before she vanished, Allison was seen speaking in hushed tones on her phone, and I distinctly remember spotting that same man in the distance. There was something unsettling about the way he moved, as if he was always aware of his surroundings, always controlling. I shudder to think what role he might have played in her disappearance. As Helen's story unfolded, Detective Simmons began cross-referencing old records and local gossip that had once been dismissed as idle chatter. It seemed that over a decade ago, rumors had circulated about a man with a criminal background, a man involved in covert operations and having a reputation for menacing individuals who threatened to expose his clandestine activities. His name, fragmented and whispered among those who dared speak it, aligned with Helen's recollection of Mr. Lawson. Further digging revealed that this dangerous figure had been associated with a small-time organized crime syndicate that exploited vulnerable residents on the outskirts of town. Though the syndicate had largely been dismantled years ago, there was evidence that Mr. Lawson's influence lingered, like a specter from a bygone era. It wasn't long before Detective Simmons discovered that bank records from the week of Allison's disappearance had transactions linked to a travel agency far from Oak Ridge Heights. Money that, when re-examined with modern tracing technology, indicated that funds were once funneled into accounts connected to a man with a history of coercion and fraud. The trace, once thought to be part of a planted false lead meant to support the runaway theory, now began to take on a more sinister hue. Instead of supporting the idea that Allison had fled voluntarily, these transactions hinted that someone else had manipulated financial records, a dangerous third party operating on the fringes of legality. Simultaneously, interviews with other longtime residents began to corroborate Helen's account. One such resident, an ex-postman named Bernard Lewis, rudimentarily recalled delivering mail to a house near Allison's, explaining, "I always found it odd. I'd see this man in a threadbare suit, always lurking around, eyeing the same houses repeatedly. I never knew what he was after, but he made me uneasy. It wasn't the way a normal person acted." His testimony, combined with Helen's vivid recollections, painted a picture of an insidious presence, a man who might have been instrumental in coercing or even forcing Allison to abandon the life she once knew. Detective Simmons and her team now faced the chilling possibility that Allison Webster's disappearance was not merely a matter of personal meltdown or voluntary escape, but a calculated flight designed to protect her and, by extension, her children from an unseen and dangerous threat. In realizing that Mr. Lawson might have been the puppet master behind those early manipulations, the one responsible for faking transactional evidence and planting false leads, the investigative team began reassembling the puzzle pieces. Night after night, in the sterile glow of a makeshift command center at the police station, Simmons reviewed old video footage from security cameras near Allison's home. With modern image enhancement software, they identified fleeting frames where a shadowed figure, matching the vague description of Mr. Lawson, appeared briefly near the entrance of the house on the morning of her disappearance. His presence, though momentary and almost ghostly, was enough to shake the foundation of the closed-case narrative. The evidence now pointed inexorably to the conclusion that Allison had been forced into a calculated vanish, orchestrated by a dangerous man seeking to deflect attention from his criminal dealings. The reappearance of such traces in the re-examination of old records sent shockwaves through the investigation. Furthermore, additional interviews revealed that near the time she left, Allison had been seen meeting someone outside a nondescript building on the outskirts of town, a meeting that, until now, had been dismissed as an innocent errand. In fact, that meeting could have been the pivotal encounter that set in motion her desperate decision to disappear and start life anew under a different name. As the investigation began to pivot from blaming Allison for her disappearance to implicating external threats in a wide-ranging conspiracy, Detective Simmons prepared a detailed report for her superiors. Each piece of testimony from Helen, Bernard, and several other reluctant but now validated witnesses added new layers of complexity to what had initially appeared to be a simple case of a mother running away. The dangerous man, Mr. Lawson, as he appeared from the blurry memories and subtle clues, was emerging as a central figure in a treacherous plot. His shadow now stretched over everything: the rare bank transactions, the planted evidence, and even the unervingly meticulous manner in which the investigation had been handled initially. In the wake of these revelations, the renewed case began to attract the attention of higher authorities. Calls for a federal inquiry echoed among community leaders, and whispers of a cover-up by local law enforcement, one intended to let the dangerous perpetrator walk free unchallenged, started to gain traction in local and national media outlets. For the Webster family, the resurgence of the case was bittersweet. After years of living with the pain of unanswered questions and a tarnished hope for reunification with their beloved mother, they were now on the brink of uncovering truths that would forever change how they viewed her disappearance. It was apparent that her decision to vanish had been a desperate act of self-preservation rather than abandonment, a decision made in the shadow of a threat that had reached far beyond their quiet suburban lives. As the detectives continued their renewed probe, the question that haunted every meeting was not merely how Allison had disappeared, but why she had been compelled to sever every connection to her former life. In time, the pieces of the puzzle, the dangerous man from her past, the financial misdirection, the corroborated witness accounts, would combine to reveal an answer that was as agonizing as it was inevitable. The reawakened legacy of painful secrets was poised to expose a conspiracy that spanned years, a sinister testament to the lengths a mother might go to protect her children. In the midst of the reinvigorated investigation, detectives uncovered an astonishing lead that would shatter every preconceived notion about Allison Webster's disappearance. A series of cross-reference DNA databases, bolstered by modern forensic technology and the digitization of cold case records, identified a living person matching almost perfectly the fragmented genetic profile extracted from Allison's belongings. The match led investigators several hundred miles away, to a small town in a neighboring state where the quiet hum of everyday life masked its own secrets. It turned out that the mysterious woman, known to the local authorities under the name Alice Rivers, had been living under that alias for the past 14 years. Her face, captured in grainy surveillance images and later confirmed by updated fingerprint analyses, bore the unmistakable contours of Allison Webster. But while the reunion that some family members had long hoped for was at hand in theory, Alice Rivers adamantly resisted any attempts to reclaim her former life in Oak Ridge Heights. In a modest apartment decorated in muted tones on a tree-lined street far from Oak Ridge, Alice, formerly Allison, lived a life meticulously built on survival and secrecy. With her dark hair kept in a short, practical style and her eyes carrying the weight of innumerable unspoken memories, she had reinvented herself in a way that afforded her a semblance of normalcy. Yet beneath the calm exterior lay the scars of a past too perilous to confront openly. In interviews reluctantly given to a specialist investigator who was tactfully assigned to the re-examined case, Alice Rivers described the circumstances that had impelled her metamorphosis. She recounted a story pieced together from tentative memories, hushed phone calls, and the fragments of her own journal entries. On that fateful morning, when she left for a routine errand that would forever alter the course of her life, Allison Webster was forced into a desperate decision. A powerful, dangerous man, whom she later suspected was none other than the elusive Mr. Lawson, had ambushed her life with threats too grim to articulate openly. His relentless intimidation and the sinister network he commanded had cornered her into a choice that no loving mother should ever have to make. To protect herself and, more crucially, to spare her children from a retribution that would have ravaged them all, she adopted an entirely new identity. Under pressure from forces far beyond her immediate control, Allison had staged her disappearance. The ATM transaction, the planted false trail, and even the misdirection provided to investigators were all part of a calculated plan to ensure that whoever was pursuing her would be led astray. In her own words, softly, with a remarkable sense of resignation, she explained, "I was left with no choice. Everything I fought for, my family and my future, was threatened by a darkness I could not ignore. I had to vanish so that the curse of that dangerous man would not destroy everything I held dear." Alice Rivers went on to detail how, after her disappearance, she had forged new documents, adopted a clean slate, and relocated to a distant state. With each passing year, she carefully built a life that was as inconspicuous as it was stable, all while living in constant fear of retribution. Even as modern technology allowed her past to creep toward the present, through the very fingerprint and DNA discoveries that now breathed new urgency into the reopened case. She remained steadfast in her determination not to return to Oak Ridge Heights. Accepting an environment of quiet anonymity, she maintained that her continued absence was the only way to truly protect her children, who had grown up without ever knowing the real face of their mother. The revelation sent shockwaves not only through law enforcement but also throughout the Webster family. The long-suffering 3 children, now adults burdened with the weight of unsolved questions, were faced with the painful irony that the mother they had grieved for might still be alive. Yet, even as hope flickered at the prospect of reunion, a profound sadness permeated every account. How could the very woman who had once embodied unconditional love now choose isolation over reconnecting with her past? And what of the threat she had so desperately fled? A threat that might still linger, silently stalking the fringes of her new life. For investigators, the appearance of Alice Rivers opened a Pandora's box of complexities. Legal and ethical dilemmas arose. Should she be extradited to face questioning by the authorities? Or should her deeply personal reasons for concealing her identity be acknowledged as a tragic but understandable act of self-preservation? Federal agents, now working in tandem with reopened local files, discovered further evidence that hinted at a larger conspiracy. The planted financial misdirection, orchestrated by shadowy figures with the power to manipulate records, was not merely an isolated tactic, but part of a grander design to protect certain dark interests. In the mounting dossier, a long-forgotten email exchange surfaced, suggesting that high-level officials had been aware of Allison's predicament. The implication was clear. Her fake disappearance was orchestrated not solely by a single dangerous man, but was embedded within a network of corruption that spanned far beyond the boundaries of her hometown. For Alice, the decision to remain in her new persona was as much about protecting her physical life as it was about preserving her mental sanity. Her voice, when finally recorded during a discreet interview conducted in a remote, secure location, resonated with a sorrowful determination. "I cannot go back," she said. "Returning would mean exposing all that I've built, and risking not only my safety but that of my children, who deserve a life untouched by terror." Despite the insistence from eager investigators and the hopeful pleas of family members, she made it clear that her life in exile was her shield. Disclosing her genuine identity would shatter the fragile balance she had achieved and potentially unearth enemies who had long lurked in the shadows. As news of Alice Rivers's identity gradually permeated the investigative circles, family members braced themselves for the next phase of a journey they had not chosen. The prospect of finally confronting their mother, albeit a version of her transformed by trauma and necessity, stirred conflicting emotions among the Websters. The revelation promised to bring long-sought answers, yet it also heralded a painful reckoning with a past that had been marred by betrayal, survival, and the unbearable need to protect. For the first time in 14 years, the cold case of Allison Webster was being rewritten as a story of calculated sacrifice. A narrative where the woman they thought was lost had chosen to preserve her life and her children's by disappearing into the depths of a dangerous conspiracy. On a gray, rain-soaked afternoon that seemed to mirror the weight of 14 long years, the Webster family gathered in a discreet, nondescript community center on the outskirts of Oak Ridge Heights. Here, under the wary eyes of federal investigators tasked with safeguarding the meeting, the time had finally come to confront the past. The once estranged family, now marked by sorrow, unanswered questions, and hard-won resilience, waited in a hushed space, hardly daring to believe that the day of reckoning had arrived. In the back of the room, behind a partition designed for privacy, a single figure appeared. Clad in an understated but impeccably neat outfit, the woman's presence was both familiar and alien. Her posture was guarded yet dignified, her eyes reflecting a blend of relief, regret, and determination. This was Allison Webster, now known as Alice Rivers, whose new identity had allowed her to vanish from the life she once led so that she might protect those dearest to her. The moment she stepped forward, time itself seemed to slow as the years of painful silence and unspoken questions hung in the balance. The family's eldest, now a young woman with features that mirrored both her mother's strength and gentle kindness, was the first to speak. With a voice trembling between anger and longing, she demanded, "Mom, why? We spent 14 years wondering, Why did you leave us? We needed you. The words, carefully chosen yet raw with emotion, filled the room, echoing the lonely nights and the unanswered questions that had haunted them for so long. Alice's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she took a steadying breath. In a voice that barely rose above a whisper, she began to explain. I did not leave because I wanted to abandon you. I left because I had no choice. The day I went to the store, something happened. A threat you couldn't imagine. I was drawn into a dangerous scheme, and I discovered that those who sought to harm our family were closing in. I had to vanish to protect you, so that you would not become targets in a conspiracy much larger than I ever expected. Her explanation was weighted with sorrow. With each slow, measured word, the truth unfolded. A truth that painted her disappearance not as an act of rejection, but as a strategic retreat from a peril that had shadowed her every step. I was forced to assume a new name, to hide in plain sight, and to forge a new life far away. I planted false trails, even allowing evidence to be manipulated in ways that would point away from me. I knew that if I returned, if my true identity were exposed, it would not only unravel the life I built to keep you safe, but would endanger everything we held dear. Her eyes dropped as she recalled the agonizing decision. A painful choice that allowed her to escape immediate danger, yet bound her heart with unending guilt for the absence, for the silence that had stretched between them. One of the younger children, now grown too quickly by years of neglect, burst into tears. You had a choice, Mom. We needed you, he cried, his voice carrying the mix of childish hurt and the bitterness of betrayal. Their father, who had borne the burden of unanswered questions with stoic composure for so long, interjected quietly but firmly. I understand now your silence, your new life. It wasn't abandonment. It was survival. But the pain of not knowing, that is something we must now try to heal together. In that charged moment, the room filled with a fragile kind of hope. There was no easy forgiveness, no simple erasure of the years spent in dark uncertainty. Instead, there was an unspoken promise, a pact that they would move forward together, that the truth, as painful as it was, might someday mend their shattered hearts. The federal agents, who had quietly observed the emotional scene, maintained their respectful distance, aware that the reunion was as much a personal reckoning as a testimonial to the resilience of the human spirit. Alice continued, her voice steadier now. I was under constant threat, a threat that could have destroyed our entire family. Every day that I remained hidden, I did so to keep you out of harm's way. My disappearance was not a choice made lightly, but the only means I had to stand between you and those who wished to silence the truth. Her words resonated in the silence that followed, turning the collective grief into a shared resolve to unearth the remaining shadows of the past. Outside, the drumming rain seemed to lessen as if nature itself agreed that a long-awaited chapter was coming to a close. The meeting ended with a tentative embrace, a symbolic gesture of reconciliation, of tentative forgiveness mingled with guarded hope. The Websters, though burdened with the scars of years without their mother, vowed to rebuild what had been broken. They knew that the dangerous past, the mysterious figure known as Mr. Lawson, and the conspiracy that had driven Allison into exile would eventually have to be faced head-on. But in this quiet reunion, beneath the flicker of dim lights and the soft murmur of renewed vows, there glimmered the possibility that truth, painful though it might be, could set them free. As the family slowly dispersed, each step marked both the end of a long silence and the tentative beginning of healing. One final message hung in the air, a silent testament to the inexorable power of truth and choice. 14 years of silence ended with one letter, and one phrase that changed everything. Subscribe to see more stories where hidden truths finally find their way home.